Hello everyone, it is me, Garrett of Oz, and I'm back for the Marvelous Land of Oz ready. So as I stated yesterday, or in the Wonderful Wizard of Oz video, that I was redoing my first two because I felt like I had really developed myself better and figured out how I wanted to present my videos better. So we're redoing the first two because I kind of figured it out in Ozma of Oz. Excuse me. Okay, so diving right on in. First, we'll go over the editions that I used. I actually used two different copies. I used this one, which is a 1939 edition, specifically for whatever reason, Riley and Lee actually put 1939 on the page. God knows why. I'm guessing it's probably early 1939, for a reason I'll come to in a second. So I primarily read this one. It's not in great shape, but in the middle of March I went on... I'm supposed to read it in February, but I still hadn't finished it by the middle of March. We'll get to that too. I went to Disney World for my honeymoon. So because I didn't want to travel with this, and because this was smaller, I actually used a the Dover publication from 1961. It's softback. There's a blue Wonderful Wizard that's the companion. I still don't have that one. Mostly because I just don't want to pay $20 for it. And it seems like every time I see it on eBay, it's going for $20, and I just don't want to pay that. This one's kind of nice because it does actually have the original illustrations in full color, just not necessarily where they're supposed to be in the storyline. So I used that while I was in Disney World. And then when I came back, I went back to this one. However, because this one's not in the world's greatest shape, I'm actually going to use, for any references today, the other printing from 1939, the popular edition. It's an oversized printing, as you can sort of see. It's a little bigger. But it's got much tighter binding. And it was released by Riley and Lee in conjunction with the film's release, as clearly indicated by it's a sequel to The Wizard of Oz and the presence of Dorothy and the Wizard, even though they are nowhere to be seen in this book. And the cover artist is unknown. Alright. So, without further ado, we'll get into The Marvelous Land of Oz. Now, The Marvelous Land of Oz was written first in 1904. It was initially intended to be a Broadway musical after the smash success of the 1902 stage Wizard. No one is really too sure which was going to come first. The book, the musical, were they going to come together? And it's obvious which parts of this book are musical comedy and which parts are not. And unfortunately, the parts that are musical comedy, particularly given that it's early 1900s musical comedy, are really not easy to get through. This is probably my least favorite of the canonical books that I have read to date. And it's funny because it was actually the one I was the most excited for. I have a theater background. I've got a minor in theater. So I was really excited from that standpoint of, oh, well, let's see. I didn't like it. So the basic general beginning is that Tip lives with Mombi in Gillikin Country. Mombi is a practicing sorceress who is doing so illegally because Tattypoo has made it illegal. The story opens with Tip being by himself because Mombi has gone off to see a crooked magician. So he manufactures a figure out of a pumpkin with a pumpkin for a head and a body made of varying parts of wood to scare Mombi. And upon Mombi's return, she has this marvelous powder of life. And she, at first, is a little scared, and then realizes, oh, no, this is Tip playing a joke, so she decides to bring the pumpkin to life. So she brings him to life, and then she decides, well, I'm going to turn... Tip, you've been a burden on me. I'm just going to turn you to stone. Which puts him in much more danger than Dorothy ever was. So Tip flees for better parts with the pumpkin head. And along the way, he does create a sawhorse that is brought to life. And they journey on their way to the Emerald City. Jack and the Sawhorse are separated from Tip. Tip encounters General Ginger, who is going to be the female Queen of Oz. Obviously, you can't... I guess you could be a male queen, but... The Queen of Oz. And she and her army of all women soldiers are going to take it back because, as she puts it, the men have been in power for far too long. So, there you go. The girls are silly and frivolous. Mostly because she wants to do it so she can... Because, yes, the men have been in power too long, but she just wants the jewels in Emerald City. So, they all arrive at the Emerald City. Ginger and her army take over. The Scarecrow, Jack, the Sawhorse, and Tip flee to the Land of the West. Now, as this happens, Mombi encounters Ginger as well and says, well, here, I'll help you take over Oz. And so she teams up with Mombi. The Scarecrow and company get the Tin Man from the Land of the West, the Tin Woodman, excuse me. He's now called Nick Chopper, which is a holdover from the stage version, although they largely kind of go back and forth on whether or not he's going to be Tin Woodman or Nick Chopper. It sort of comes and goes. This book has more puns than you can shake a stick at. It's Pun City from left to right. Baum is a big fan of puns. I personally like puns. The Muppets are one of my big comedic influences, and this is too much puns. This would make Fozzie Bear go, ooh. So there's distractions as they attempt to return to the Emerald City. Along the way, they meet the most obnoxious character in the history of ever. And he was one of the reasons I struggled to get through the book. And that's Mr. H.M. Wogglebug T.E., who is a intellectual know-it-all that would make Frasier Crane look like a simpleton. So it's a parody of the intellectual. At times, Baum is almost saying, yeah, brains are great, but on the other hand, he's also going, well, Teehee, don't be too smart, don't be too intellectual. Which is, finding a balance. After meeting the Wogglebug, they encounter more traps from Mombi. Scarecrow summons the Queen of the Field Mice, who makes a return from Wonderful Wizard, and she sends her soldier mice inside the Scarecrow to get rid of Ginger and company. Which they do. They take it back. The girls are scared and run away, but unfortunately for our friends, they end up trapped in the palace, because while Ginger and her company leave the throne room, they don't actually leave the Emerald City itself. So, using the Powder of Life again, and various antiques, and a moose head, known as a gump in Oz, they assemble a flying bed, and they fly out of Emerald City to find Glinda, because they are sure Glinda will help them, which is true. However, Glinda reveals, in a great twist, that Scarecrow is not the rightful heir, that actually the King of Oz, before the wizard came, had a daughter, and the wizard magicked her away somewhere to the north to Mombi, and that's all anyone knows. The child disappeared after that. So, Glinda says, well, I'll help you take back the Emerald City, but we're going to find Ozma first. So they return to Emerald City. There's a hide-and-seek game with a flower. Mombi reveals that Tip is indeed Ozma, changes her back, and Glinda removes Mombi's magic, and Ginger decides she's going to go be a good girl and leave and not conquer Oz anymore, and Ozma is crowned queen. Let's see, I've got a note for illustration 275. Yes. Lovely illustration of Mombi changing her back. Here. Ta-doo! Interestingly, Ozma is described as being a red blonde, even though Tip very, very clearly has dark-colored hair. And there's Tip with the creation of Jack. But she's later drawn with dark hair. Contrastingly, Dorothy becomes a blonde in the later books. The last chapter, The Riches of Content, is very literally a sort of, when you're watching a movie, a where are they now sort of moment. And you can sort of tell that Baum didn't really intend to write more books after this. In fact, it's 1907 before finances meant that he needed to write another Oz book. Now, during this time, so the book itself is okay. Baum is very good at writing 200-page novels in 300 pages. The book is incredibly slow until they get to Glinda, and then it's just bang, 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 bang. And it actually gets very, very good. And that's, I think, one of the more frustrating aspects is you can tell when the Wogglebug, and there was a stage adaptation of Ozma of Oz, of Land of Oz, called the Wogglebug, which is its own separate thing. We won't really get into that. Huge flop. Nobody wanted a full thing with the Wogglebug as the main character at all. The Wogglebug, the girl soldiers, it's clearly meant to be the showgirl chorus. There's a scene with giant sunflowers meant to call back to the giant poppy field scene. There's lots of physical comedy and banter and Muppet, to a degree, Kermit and Fozzie style banter back and forth between Scarecrow and Jack in one chapter, which is actually probably one of the better chapters. Which would be Chapter 7, His Majesty the Scarecrow, where Scarecrow finally appears, and it's just straight out of a vaudeville routine, because Jack thinks he doesn't speak the same language as the Scarecrow because he comes from the land of the north. So they ask a maid, Jelly a Jam, which is a verbal pun of jelly or jam, Jelly a Jam, who does appear multiple times throughout the series. They think they don't speak each other's language, so she comes in to translate, and someone will say one thing, and she'll turn around to be something mean and say it to the other person. And then they figure out, oh, well, I understand what you're saying. Well, this was just silly. It's a delightful chapter. No reason for it to be there. And like I said, that's perhaps one of the most frustrating elements of this book, is the stage concepts that were introduced into it. Baum has a similar problem in TikTok of Oz, which we'll get to actually in the next actual video, because that'll be the next one I record. So we'll get into that a little bit then. Other things that were sort of sort of things to stand out with. This is the first book published by Riley and Lee. Originally, it was Riley and Britton. And because Baum had issues with George M. Hill, which had then been bought out by Bobbs Merrill. So Baum jumped to a new publisher. At the same time, Dinslow and Baum had a falling out as well. So Dinslow was out, and John R. Neal was brought in. Now, Neal and Baum have some issues. They don't always... Baum was not a big fan of Neal's work. At times, he said a couple of times, someone like Maxfield Parrish should have done these. And there are letters back and forth between them to Baum's snark towards him. And it's obvious there are times where Neal really doesn't pay much attention to the text. Not so much in the earliest books, but definitely as you get along through the series, there's more of that. This glass is sweating really badly. I'm going to set this on the floor because I don't want that on my bookshelf. Goodness. Sorry. However, there are some really lovely things. In the illustration on 125 of the Scarecrow and the Tin Man reuniting, there's a little picture of Dorothy. You get some truly beautiful things. His women are always stunning, particularly Glinda. Trying to find a good picture of Glinda for this. And there she is. And in fact, my blog, which we'll discuss in a moment, I'm even using an illustration from Jack Pumpkinhead's Ride. There you go. So it's the first book that Neal illustrates. Neal will illustrate the rest of the Riley and Lee. Well, no, not the rest. He illustrates up until his death. Neal never illustrated The Wizard of Oz. He passed away while he was in the process of getting ready to do an edition once Oz fell into the public domain. But he himself never got to do it. Which is a shame, because I would be very curious to see how he would have handled certain things. We obviously know what his Dorothy and Glinda and the main characters would look like, but I'd like to know what his Wicked Witch of the East would have looked, or Wicked Witch of the West would have looked like. Would he have given her green skin? As discussed last night, who knows? And we'll never know. In fact, the matter is, we will never know. The book itself was a big success, obviously, because it did launch the rest of them. There's a lot of characters that show up in later Oz books. Ginger makes a return. Mombi makes at least one return in a Thompson book. Ginger shows up several times. Jack Pumpkinhead becomes a favorite. The Sawhorse is a favorite. They're back. The Wogglebug shows up again, but never with the large part that he has in Land. Again, thank God. So you get a whole lot of introduction. Obviously, Ozma stays around for the rest of time. And in this, you get to see an Oz that's becoming more of a utopia. You also see it separate some of the earlier devices. For instance, when Jack Pumpkinhead first arrives in Emerald City, they have to wear glasses. But then when they come back later, they don't have to wear glasses. That's really the last appearance of the green glasses. Emerald City from this point on is entirely made of emeralds. There's a little talk of money, but not much. And by the time we get to Emerald City of Oz, money is not a thing in Oz. Sorcery is still being practiced, even though it's been made largely illegal, and eventually it becomes made completely illegal. If you're not Glinda, the wizard, Ozma, or Ozma has not given you permission, which she'll occasionally give to Dorothy and to others to use a magical property. That's kind of the end of that. The Scarecrow and the Tin Man, of course, play a huge part, again, because of their success in the stage show. And in fact, Baum even dedicated this book to those excellent Goodfellows and eminent comedians David C. Montgomery and Fred A. Stone, whose clever presentations of the Tin Woodman and Scarecrow have delighted thousands of children throughout the land. This book's gratefully dedicated by the author. And there's a very nice sketch of them by Neil. Neil's drawings of the Scarecrow and the Tin Man, they definitely change. The Tin Man is basically as he is. The Scarecrow gets refined better. So there's a lot that's going on in this one, but frankly, I did not care for it in the slightest bit. It was really a tough slog to get through. But I know there are people out there who do enjoy it. So that's kind of the Land of Oz the Marvelous Land of Oz in a nutshell. It's, I guess, really, I appreciate it for who it introduces to the world, but that's really about it. Land of Oz is also the last book that takes place entirely in Oz, or at least centrally in Oz, until Emerald City of Oz. Because the next three either take place outside of Oz and then they come at the end, or they're on a journey to get to the Land of Oz. And then we stay in Oz for 2 books and then we go out again. So that's kind of the Land of Oz. I mentioned a moment ago my blog. It will not be on Blogspot. It's actually going to be on WordPress. I did more finagling last night. I'm hoping to have the intro post live soon. So look for that in the TikTok of Oz video. But there we go. I'd like to thank everyone for watching, subscribing. When the blog goes live, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to do some recapping of the books. That way we can open up discussion, because it's easier to have discussion through blog comments than it is through YouTube comments. So, there we go. Anyhow, that's it for now, and I will try to have TikTok of Oz here shortly. But for those of you going in chronological order, please go on to Ozma of Oz. Right, well, y'all have a great time, and I will see you all later.